Welcome to this education support film. Today we're talking about the well-being of the higher education workforce. And I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Gail Kinman from Birkbeck University. Gail is an occupational health psychologist and is a leading light in the field of research of well-being in the higher education workforce. Gail's been doing this for 24 years. There aren't many people who know more about it than she does. So we're delighted that she has taken the time to talk to us about it today. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you very much, Sinead.
I would like to start by asking you what you think the main impacts are of this current situation on the well-being of people working in higher education across the UK.
Right, well, like everyone, people working in higher education across the UK are experiencing huge amounts of challenges related to COVID-19, but also the steps taken to contain the pandemic. Many people were required to work at home very, very quickly with little preparation, sometimes maybe a day or even 2 days. They may not have had the right equipment or the right software, etc. So they were expected to almost seamlessly fill in the gaps with preparing lectures, with delivering lectures and providing support to students. And obviously students themselves were very anxious and uncertain, so they needed a lot of extra support. As I said, problems with equipment, but also adequate workspaces. And, I did interview somebody fairly recently who the first couple of weeks of lockdown was working from his daughter's bunk bed. And clearly, that is not sustainable, but that was the only quiet space that he was able to have in the house when he was delivering a lecture. And obviously there are health and safety implications there. Also, converting lectures to online mode, it may sound easy, but it isn't as easy as obviously just sitting in front of a computer. And, a lot of work does need to be done. Students may be less engaged when they're at home. So all of these things can actually increase workload. And I think a particular issue is that many members of staff are trying to balance the demands of their work, which are obviously considerable and maybe higher at this time, with caring responsibilities and domestic duties. And that can be incredibly challenging because looking after a young child isn't necessarily conducive with delivering a lecture or supporting an upset student. And, many people that I'm speaking to are saying that they have to do a lot of their work when their children have gone to bed. So, and then they're woken up wanting to be played with early in the morning, so they're burning the candle at both ends. Another issue, and I think this is a particularly powerful concern for people working in HE, there's going to be massive changes in the sector after this finishes, or whenever that may be. So there's a lot of job insecurity because some institutions have already announced redundancies, and there may be some mergers, etc. Uncertainty is a very, very powerful cause of anxiety. So obviously people don't really know what's going to happen next term. Some institutions are talking about remaining online totally next term. Some are talking about a blended version, partly online, partly face-to-face. Now, the workload implications of that are likely to be fairly extreme. So, very, very many changes that are related to additional stress and anxiety in staff.
Well, I'm particularly striking what you say about people with caring responsibilities, needing to get their work done after their children have gone to bed and then getting up on the other side of the day at 6 o'clock with kids eager to play. I mean, that is, I guess for a lot of us, we've done that on a temporary basis. And of course now temporary is becoming less short term. It may still be temporary, but it's extending. And so I guess with it's obvious to work out what the concerns there would be if we had kind of continue extending that over time. But thinking about individuals dealing with these issues, what practical steps do you think people can personally take to look after themselves or to support their colleagues while all of this is going on?
Well, that's clearly vital, and many people that I'm speaking to are actually exhausted already. So prioritizing self-care, although it may be very challenging at this particular time when you're being pulled in several different ways, you know, by your organization, by, you know, demands in different ways from your personal life as well. But prioritizing your self-care, you know, the whole thing about putting on your own oxygen mask before you can help other people is really, really important, because, you know, this is going to be a marathon, isn't it? It's going to be over the longer term. So energy is important. I think it's particularly important to try to set a routine as best you can, because, you know, unless you contain the job in some way, it can spill over to inhabit every aspect of your life. You know, so you find yourself working very early in the morning, you find yourself having meetings during lunchtimes and breaks, and then you find yourself working in the evenings as well. So recovery time is absolutely essential. It's also essential to spend time with your family, because, you know, basically they are more important than any job. And I think a lot of people are realizing this, you know, that priorities are changing. Making sure that you have a very strong supportive network, a mutually supportive network, is important. And it's more important now than ever. So prioritizing time to talk to colleagues, not just about work, but also, you know, connecting with them in terms of personal life, thinking about, you know, how you can share information and also share tips. Some people that I've spoken to are saying that they are so sick of online meetings, you know, through Zoom and Teams, whatever, that they're quite resistant to doing that in their personal life because it's just a bit too much. But, you know, you can connect with people in different ways, by the phone, etc. You know, but it's really, really important to have this support. And one thing that occurred to me yesterday, because I'm running a research study on how people are coping with working at home during the pandemic, and many participants are actually working in higher education, and they're saying that, you know, the organization doesn't really understand the additional workload that's being put on me through COVID. And they're saying, you know, if people complain, they're saying, well, you know, your workload is the same, you're not doing anything different. But actually thinking about the additional time that's needed, you know, to get to grips with delivering online and supporting students and juggling the demands of your personal life as well. So it might be helpful for people to keep a diary that actually sets out what they're doing and how long it's actually taking them. So if necessary, you know, when workload is being set at the end of the academic year or the beginning of next year, managers and organizations can be more realistic in identifying the amount of time that it actually takes under current conditions. And I think finally, and you know, this may sound a little bit Pollyanna-ish, but I think it is important to look for the positives in the situation that we're in. And a lot of people are saying, you know, that they are getting positives out of it, you know, going for family walks, etc., being able to spend more time baking, you know, the little positives that can help buffer the many demands made on us at this particular time and the anxieties.
I can certainly relate to that. One of the highlights for me in all of this is having lunch with my young children most days, and it's a real delight. Though unfortunately I've also taken to baking, which is not necessarily going to have the best health outcomes, but sure, we'll take it for now. But when you're talking about that, Gail, something that strikes me is that whether it's to do with managing the work and the workplace and the demands of our line managers, or whether it's in domestically dealing with the different demands at home, and something we're not always very good at, and we're not always taught to do in our work lives, is boundary management. We're not always, nobody ever tells you, well, this is how you might think about that. And it strikes me that actually boundary management is becoming a key skill in getting through this time.
Clearly, it's absolutely massive, and I should have said that first, because I mean, you know, it is one of the most important things. Now, there's a lot of research suggesting, and my own included, suggesting that people have different preferences for how or the extent to which they prefer their work and personal life to be integrated or separated. You know, some people prefer to spend long hours in the office and then come home and do nothing work-wise at home. Or some people prefer to do everything at home, or some people prefer to juggle. But actually, people now have been thrown into this situation where they are being forced to work at home. So your office is also your home. And it's very difficult for them to set boundaries if they've never had to do that. You know, people are working on their kitchen table, they're sharing a workspace with children, partners, etc. That can be very difficult. But so setting some kind of physical boundary is vital, but also a psychological boundary, making sure that you switch off at a particular time, and setting what I call rules of engagement with your family as well. You know, this is the time I'm going to be available, and you do the same. And this is when perhaps we're going to go for a walk as a family, or we're going to play a game, or etc. But you have to do that. And, you know, some people say that doing a particular activity can be quite useful as a symbolic boundary when you're working at home. Change your clothes, you know, put the radio on, go and sit in the garden for 5 minutes. Just have some kind of boundary setting activity where you switch off from being a worker and then back to, you know, a general person or mother or partner.
Very helpful. I'll think just, and it's that point you make about 5 minutes in the garden. Actually, it doesn't have to be a very elaborate thing, and most of us could find 5 minutes, even if we don't feel it in the pressure of the moment. I've got to get the dinner on, but actually we could find 5 minutes to do that.
Oh, certainly. The big risk is, I think, with people in higher education, is often that you're switching in and out of work.
Yeah.
You know, you're kind of parent mode, then you're work mode, and then you're alternating, and that can be more challenging to switch off.
Indeed. If you had a magic wand, given that you've been looking at these issues of well-being, and of course we're in a particular crisis point, but against a backdrop where well-being and mental health have been of growing concern over you know the past couple of decades really, and you've been studying it in that time, taking your kind of accumulated experience and knowledge, Gail, about this. If you had a magic wand and could just put a little brain chip into every line manager in higher education and get them to do 2 or 3 things routinely with their staff, what would you have them do?
Oh gosh, that's a very good question. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, the research I've been doing over the last 24 years has highlighted particular issues, but actually under current conditions, they're magnified. And there's also other ones as well. You know, so there's lots and lots of issues of concern, but clearly, you know, we have to consider what we can do. So number one, obviously, you know, we have to be aware of the drivers from both sides, because higher education is in a situation of considerable uncertainty, and, you know, people do fear for their jobs. So we do need to prioritize recruitment, and we do need to prioritize retention, but actually not at the expense of staff well-being. And I think that is something that all organisations and managers need to be aware of. You know, we talk a lot about student well-being and student mental health, but not many people talk about staff well-being, and it really does underpin student mental health as well. So it should be treated as important as student experience. It's the heart of any organisation. Risk assessments, I think, are really important before any change is instigated. And, you know, higher education is very, very, very fond of putting changes in place, but perhaps not necessarily thinking about the implications for staff workload and staff well-being. So risk assessments would be really, really useful to think about the implications for workload. You know, an example may be the implications of a blended approach, where staff will be expected to deliver online, but also expected to deliver face-to-face. Now, clearly that's going to be taking more time. And above all, I think it's really important to think about the type of support that's needed at this time, but also, you know, for all the other aspects of the other demands that people in higher education face. And we've recently been commissioned by yourselves to do some research on that. because, you know, we believe that any organisation should have a systemic and multi-level approach to looking after the well-being of their staff. You know, number one, we have the primary or the structural interventions where, you know, you diagnose the sources of pressure and the demands, and you put things in place to stop staff from being badly affected by them. We also need individual skills. You know, we can't deny that. We all have a duty to ourselves and to the people we work with to be as resilient as we can. But staff are not going to be able to be resilient unless they have a supportive organisation to help them do so. So we're going to be looking at the types of support that will be most appropriate under current conditions.
Brilliant. And I guess just a last question, Gail, if we are still very much digesting what's been happening over these last 3 months, but obviously we're going to extend through the summer and into September with a degree of uncertainty. And as you say, there are different modalities that universities are discussing around how they come back. Are there any particular issues beyond those of maybe the burnout that we alluded to earlier? Are there any particular issues that you would anticipate coming up over the autumn that we should be keeping a watching eye on?
I think one of the most important things is having a break. And, you know, certainly at the moment, staff realise that they do have to have a holiday, you know, to be effective. But of course, it's very difficult to get away. And people are holidaying at home, if you like. And certainly a lot of people that I'm working with at the moment in terms of research is saying that it's very difficult for them to switch off. They may be on holiday, but, you know, they're still continuing to work. And there's some very good examples of good practice in some institutions of saying, well, you know, to their staff, have some extra days off in recompense, if you like, for, you know, the huge amount of effort that you've put in to support students. But actually, if your workload is so high, you can't really afford that luxury. So people are tending to work anyway. So, you know, it's organisations anticipating people's workloads and making sure that they have an adequate break before this all resumes, I guess, in the autumn, because, you know, we really don't know what shape things will take by then.
I guess what's really, what strikes me in that is in lots of ways, that's good news, because we don't need to do anything very elaborate or very complicated or very sophisticated. Actually, this comes back to some really simple practice around treating people well, taking regard, having respect of their own time and having regard for their well-being and safety and health.
Yeah, and I think as well, making sure that people are seen as individuals with individual needs, and these individual circumstances will change over time. You know, if you have a family member that's sick, if you have a school that closes, you know, they will all have a knock-on effect. That'll obviously be very time consuming for managers, but, you know, it's really essential under current conditions.
Yep. Well, and I guess as managers and leaders, we're really needing to be at the forefront of providing that support. And for institutions, there's also the piece about thinking how to support the managers who are absorbing some of that.
Because the managers themselves are often forgotten, and it's really interesting. You know, you read so much guidance about supporting staff. You know, the Health and Safety Executive Management Standards Framework is all about supporting your staff. But an important competency is prioritising your own needs. So managers really do need to prioritise that as well.
That's incredibly helpful. Professor Gail Kinman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about these issues with us today. As Gail referenced, she'll be doing some research later this year, and we will make sure to publicise that as widely as we can through our higher education networks. Thanks for your time, Gail.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.